Alright, I'm just gonna start. Okay, so today I'm going to be covering, I guess, the things in the current RKS TAS. For people who don't know, Hetfield has been working on a new task for TIA any percent of this game. So I'm going to take one last look at the old task, or given, I guess it would be the current task because the new task isn't published yet. And I'm going to be just looking over a few of the things, things that are done optimally / not optimally. And then things I will cover are things such as frame data and things of that nature, like why some things are the way they are in the task, as opposed to RTA, for example. And then the other side of things, the things I won't be covering, would be things such as, I guess, the way game mechanics work naturally. That's stuff like that can be explained in RTA commentary. Things like boss order or quick kills, for example. Those are kind of easy to explain for RTA, but for TAS, I'm going to explain more of the more intricate things, so there's probably going to be a lot more technical things that probably don't make as much sense if you're not that familiar with the game, but it's going to be decent enough, hopefully, that people understand what I'm talking about for those who are sort of familiar with the game. But anyway, so some background on the TAS. RKS is a PC game that can be tasked via Hourglass, and Hourglass is kind of its dumb program, so the replay can only actually, whatchamacallit, so the game can only run at 64 FPS in Hourglass, and that's not really the most optimal, because, you know, getting FPS greater than 60 is kind of banned. Well, not really banned, but it's usually hard converted down to 60 FPS anyway. 60 FPS is obviously the standard, so running the game above that standard is really awkward and should not be a thing. Other things to note before I start the task. Some in-game stuff I can explain as we go along, but other than the fact that it's going to be running at 64 FPS, other things I should note is that this game was originally tasked on the English version, and that's actually slower by like about a second, so if you're interested in speedrunning the game, you gotta play it on the Japanese version for maximum efficiency. Other things, the game is ran on version 1.05c, Japanese version of that. Well, this task is on the English version, but if you want to be optimal, it's going to be 1.05c Japanese, as you can see over this highlighted region here. All my replays are on version 1.05c. The latest version of the game is actually 1.06b, but every time the new update for the game actually makes the game load stages differently. And what that does is it actually takes longer to load each stage, so it loses about like a second on each stage. But that's enough technical details about that. That's RTA stuff as well. So I don't think there's anything else. I guess look forward to the new task that's coming out. It will be a lot of changes, saves a lot of time over this task, but let's just dive into it now. I'm going to highlight this recording anyway, so hopefully it'd be good for history at the very least. One last look of this task. Okay, so I'm just going to start now. So similar to RTA, the route is essentially the same for the task. There's a few things that are different. I'll point those out as they come along. There's nothing too important to note for Freudia's stage, as it's quite similar. One thing to note here is that this room is going to be done in the dark, because you can better optimize movement and sliding, and you're actually able to kill the Skull Lantern, which has 5 HP, which is huge. Can't really easily be done for RTA, plus the added fact that movement is insanely difficult without being able to see where you're going. So the task can do that quite optimally. A thing to note is that even then, a task is not completely man-made, it's made by people who task the game, so the movement is actually not completely optimal from my understanding of the new task. But overall, there's not a lot of changes to this first stage. One thing to note here, going into Freudia's stage, is that there's something that we've sort of called the Doppler effect, where a boss's iframes are about 60 FPS, or 60 frames rather, 59 to be exact. And so the object is to hit Freudia every 59 frames to keep her in iframes. And so charging a fully charged Buster, however, takes longer than that. It takes around 83 frames. So the sort of idea behind this fight is that you continuously attack her from farther away, so that during the travel distance of the Buster you have more time to charge. And the farther away each charge shot is, the more time you have to charge, and it's sort of this Doppler effect where you continuously gain more time. And so that's something that's actually improved in the new task, better Doppler effects, for lack of better words. Nothing too special about the manipulation on that last boss pattern. You don't actually see any of the other boss attacks, since the task can manipulate the best pattern and get 5 hits per cycle, pretty much. 5 and 6. On this stage, I haven't talked a lot about because it's really straightforward in terms of what the task does. A lot of just changing between Stachel and Buster in order to, I guess, just get through enemies really quickly. The only, I guess, unimportant thing to note with Freud and Stachel, it's funny because Freud and Stachel is, of course, a really great weapon in the RTA because you can use it while sliding, and, you know, sliding is fast, so you can kill enemies while moving at top speed. But the funny thing about the task is that Freud and Stachel is an RNG weapon, and for RTA it's horrible because it's an RNG weapon, but for the task it's actually a godsend because you can use this RNG weapon to manipulate RNG without losing any time at all, because you can use it while sliding, so it's quite amazing in that regard. And so this task fight here completely manipulates Grollo to just do nothing but jump around, so she doesn't even get a chance to attack. And another interesting thing is that this fight is also not completely optimal, because you can, same as the first fight, Freudia fight, you can also use the sort of Doppler effect, quote-unquote, to gain more time as you shoot Buster shots. I don't know exactly what's in the new task yet, but what I've heard is that 3 Busters in between the Stachel sets is actually more optimal, but we'll get to that later. And so, just like RTA, getting Eins is super important for the upcoming stages because you can save so much time using Eins. Even more so for the task because task movement is, of course, as optimal as you can get, especially with Eins, which is a lot harder to optimize given the fact that not only do you have to jump a set distance, but it also floats upwards. Don't think there's anything too special here. Yeah, you can see the thing with the task too is that it can manipulate random drops, and so it can actually get more Eins. And so I guess a little bit about weapon drops. So since you can pretty much manipulate weapon drops for free, that's not really an issue. Every time you collect a drop, a small drop is about 1 frame, while a larger drop is 10 frames because it refills 10 energy. Or I guess a small drop is 2 frames because it refills 2 bars of energy, while a large drop is 10 frames because it refills 10 bars of energy. However, there's also lag frames that occur when you get a large drop, so it ends up being more closer to 20 frames. And this fight, similar to the RTA fight, she doesn't really do anything if you shoot at her. I mean, it's even easier for the task to do, given that you can optimize when it hits her. Okay, so Lusty's stage has a bigger change compared to just movement stuff. Coming up is the fact that there's Yoku blocks in this stage, and you can actually zip using Yoku blocks. So right there, those Yoku blocks, you can actually zip, and it does save time. And the task does get a large refill here, and that's actually slower than getting 5 small drops. So anytime you want to get 1 large drop, you actually want to get 5 small drops because it reduces lag frames. And yes, it's playing back at 64 FPS because the program used to task this game only tasks the game at 64 FPS, not 60 FPS, unfortunately. Hourglass as a program is very incompatible with most things, and it has to use Windows XP in the first place, so it's a very outdated system, but it's the best we can do to task this game, given that there's no emulator for PC. I don't think there's much else to say, aside from the fact that there could be better optimization for the Yoku blocks there, as well as the large drop can be replaced with 5 small drops if necessary. I don't know if there's 5 small enemies in that stage to even have 5 small drops, but regardless, you'll see it as an upcoming theme. Alright. So I don't remember what kind of changes Zorn's stage has. I don't anticipate having many changes, as the stage is really straightforward in terms of movement. These are things I kind of wish I could do RTA, some of the movement at least. I'll just let it kind of play out. Okay, so cool thing about Zwei, when you jump off of Zwei, you also gain Zwei's momentum. So anytime you're riding Zwei, you almost always want to jump from it to have the speed boosts, like jumping momentum, if you will. But we'll see later on where that doesn't apply as much in the next stage. And then bosses like Zorn are really straightforward, where you just want to keep the boss in iframes, and that's really easy to do given her attacking patterns. Okay, so all the other stages so far, these past 5 stages have been really minor. This next stage is probably has the most major changes, first of all, for 2 reasons. One is the use of jet slides, which is something that was not known from the original making of the TAS. And the second thing is better bomb usage optimization. So bombs take about 145 frames to explode, and you can prime them in advance, and well, I'll explain that later. So this entire sliding plateau here can actually be sped up by using a jet slide there. So jet slides are frame perfect, pixel perfect. And basically the idea is that the jet speed is added to your sliding speed, so you basically move at 4 times the speed. And another jet slide can be used in this long conveyor belt section here, with even added speed because of the fact that it's also conveyor belt speed added to that. Okay, so here the TAS fully charges Zorn's bombs and lets all of them out at once, and then it proceeds to chain bombs together until Schwer dies. And that seems really straightforward. However, the fact that the bombs were not primed in advance, but were laid out directly in front of the boss as you enter the room, means that you're losing precious time because you have to wait for the bombs to explode. Those 145 frames. So, better optimization would be to drop a bomb in the previous room and sort of slide it along with you, and then pick it up right before the boss door and enter with the bomb sort of pre-primed, and it does save a bit of time. So going into Seek Day stage, I also don't really know if there's a lot of major changes to the stage. As I don't think anything new really changed the stage. Maybe better, of course, same with all the other stages, there could be better optimization of movement overall. More wise things here. TAS shenanigans, of course. So the damage output there is so that the TAS can take an appropriate amount of damage to kill Seek Day in 2 hits. Hey, actually it killed her in 3 hits. Okay, so that's maybe something the new task takes care of. I don't really know because it's hard to take damage and not lose a lot of time. So it might be the case that even with that damage, you can't really do much. Although that being said, I don't think you need to take that much damage in order to get 3 hits, but we'll see. Okay, so this next stage, huge difference in this stage. So the new task is not going to get Lily. And the old task here, the current task I should say, the reason why the old task gets Lily is because Lily is an automatic sort of attacking. It's similar to Pete from Mega Man 5 and other Mega Mans, I guess. And so for the final boss, you can just sit at the door and have Lily beat up the boss and you don't have to even move at all. And so what that means is that it abuses task timing rules. Task timing rules are based on inputs, not based on final hit or cutscenes or anything like that. So it abuses task timing and it technically beats the game faster because it doesn't input anything for the last boss. But that's actually way slower, even compared to RTA. I think if I recall correctly, it's a 14 cycle with Lily. But a task optimally can actually beat her in 5 cycles, so you can see that it's a huge difference. Oh, one interesting thing here that's also not really known is the way that Tia entered this boss room. You sort of fall down slowly because of the water, but there's something called momentum storage that I sort of found accidentally. Well, it happens to a lot of people accidentally, but no one ever really thought about it until one day I was kind of thinking about it and we sort of looked into it. And basically the idea is that when you land from the air and land on the ground, you can think of it sort of like your falling speed is -1, and when you land it gets set to 0, but if you transition on a door it keeps the value, so that you sort of fall down again with the value already at sort of -1, so it becomes -2. I don't know if that was a good explanation, but the idea is the momentum of the falling is stored, and you get twice the momentum falling down. It's not really useful in a lot of places, but for that it saves maybe 10 frames. So that deboost there is actually slower. You can get around that without deboosting, and it's actually a bit faster in that room. Other than that, Ainz is heavily abused in these upcoming stages in this current task, but in the new task you'll see that Zwei is actually a lot more useful and a lot more abused. And the reason for that is because Zwei does move at sliding speed, which is optimal speed, and it also gives you necessary height. You think of it as skip reaccelerating to terminal fall speed. I don't know if that's exactly it, because I feel like you can do it in other areas as well. Okay, so I already explained the thing with weapon refills, so you're gonna see a lot less optimal weapon refilling because of lag frames that weren't properly explored. Everything here is sort of straightforward though, in terms of what's happening. Nothing too special or out of the ordinary. This is where most of the Zwei energy is used. And we get this refill in RTA normally, but of course it's the task, so they can just manipulate drops when they need to. Nothing too special about this fight either. It's sort of an auto-scroller battle, if you will. Just make sure you can hit the boss on the first frame active, and it's really fast. Even in RTA, it's pretty much optimal. That last hit is a little bit tricky for RTA. Sometimes you can fire too early. But anyway, moving on. So, Separate 3. The major change here in Separate 3 is not so much the stage itself, but the fact that the boss fight is not optimal. So you'll see in a little bit. I think we'll see a couple of weapon drops here. Okay, so that's a big weapon refill. So that's bad, as I mentioned before, because there are lag frames. And then, so this large refill is sort of required, so it's nothing special about that. Here we can see an interesting task movement that we can't do in RTA. Too difficult. There's a lot more room for the task. I believe that's a frame earlier than where RTA usually places it. So here's a large refill, a couple of small refills, and then here's, I believe, another large refill. Yeah, so both of those, so there are 3 large refills that occurred in the stage, and all of them were not optimal, just because of lag frames. The first phase of this fight is really straightforward, though. Have a fully charged to be able to hit the boss as soon as possible. That D-boost is in order to travel farther enough. Okay, so you saw that this fight uses 4 water, but it's actually more optimal to use 2 water and 2 fully charged Girl Schwartz, similar to the Doppler effect that I mentioned earlier. And this fight is really easy to manipulate. Well, not easy to manipulate, but I mean, like, it's a fight that can easily be improved by manipulation, is what I actually mean. And so the TAS would optimally want to get Raymond to the side of the screen in order to get hit by the fully charged Girl Short as soon as possible. Okay. So, the longest time... TAS has always gone top route here. That's what we've known. It's been quite the standard for the early days of RKS. It was not too recently, but it was eventually changed to bottom route for RTA, which is about half a second faster for RTA. Just given the fact that we, as humans, do not have this sort of optimal movement that the TAS has. So it's actually easier to optimize movement on the bottom route. Approximately half a second faster for bottom route. But things to note here is that the TAS is not completely optimal because it doesn't use any ZY for any of the areas. And so using ZY, both bottom route and top route can be faster. Apart from that, you sort of just have to see the new TAS to really see the differences in what happens in the stage. Apart from that, though, this boss fight is really straightforward. You want to take 3 damage before this fight, and, you know, just like RTA, it's similar. You just take damage on 3. I guess something nice to note is that since it's the TAS, it can manipulate Separate to not give you any teleports. Also very nice, just 4 hits of Girl Short, no need to mash like I do in RTA. I guess the funny thing to know about this cutscene here is that that hit that Iris just used is supposed to reduce your HP to 1. But if you were to use Cheat Engine and refilled your HP to full, then this E-Tank is actually instant, and you just teleport after it. It's kind of funny, but obviously it will never really be a thing because there's no way to get your HP back to 28 without using Cheat Engine or some sort of hacking device, tool, whatever you want to call it. Alright, so as I mentioned before, there's a lot of things going on with ZY that can be utilized. Basically, any time that there is movement across a horizontal room where there's a lot of jumping and also room for ZY, it will always be faster to use ZY, pretty much, given the length of the room. And the reason for that is that ZY moves at sliding speed once it reaches top speed. And the difference is that every time you jump, you're moving at walking speed, so the more you jump, the slower you are. So in that first long room you saw, it was actually more optimal to use Y there. I could make a case for this room being more optimal with his Y as well, but it might be hard to get the ammo for that. And then here, I don't think the TAS actually knew, but you can actually use Y to get across the bottom here. And it's something we do in RTA. So, if anything, there's something there that RTA is actually faster. Taking Y on the bottom there. Alright. So obviously, it's a TAS, so we can manipulate Boss Spider to get a 3-cycle Boss Spider, which, as you know, is quote-unquote the best RNG you could possibly get. Even for RTA, it's possible to get a 3-cycle depending on the RNG you get, but it's very difficult. And it requires 3 hits in 1 cycle. And a funny thing to note is that when I discovered that you could use Rain to get a triple hit on Spider per cycle, the immediate first thing I thought was the possibility of getting 3 hits of Stachel with the TAS. Essentially, 2-cycling Spider. And well, you'll see the result in the upcoming TAS. Yeah, it does manipulate to get minimal crossovers for Boss Spider, which is the fastest, of course. Nothing too outstanding on this stage at all. It's really straightforward in terms of the movement. The only thing I can note is that there are a couple of enemies that you do kill on this stage. So instead of getting the larger refills the TAS does earlier, it could better appropriately get smaller refills across the board. As I keep on harping on, I guess. I'm really happy about this fight, because this fight is the same, obviously, but using Buster on this fight, being viable RTA was probably one of the greatest accomplishments for RTA, in my opinion, given the fact that Buster has way less RNG than Stachel, making it way more viable to use. Okay, so that's that. Moving on to Iris 3, this is the boss rush, and before you enter the boss area, there's actually a bunch of refills. There are 6 small weapon refills and 1 large weapon refill. And as I mentioned earlier, you don't even have to manipulate for refills because you get a lot of them right here. So it's actually way better if the TAS were to get the refills here from all these small drops instead. But instead, it gets them earlier on with larger drops, which is suboptimal just given the lag frames. And so the TAS goes counterclockwise for the boss rush. And surprisingly enough, it's actually more optimal to go clockwise, but we'll get to that in a bit. These first few boss fights are the same as always. Okay, so Grola here. After you come out of Grola, you enter Trow stage. And before you enter Trow stage, you want to have fully charged Geister Wand. And so the TAS doesn't actually have enough time to fully charge Geister Wand here. This is one of the reasons why it's less optimal to go counterclockwise, because you have a lot more time to fully charge Geister Wand if you're coming clockwise from the right. Because you come from Zorn stage. So if you think about it clockwise, you come from Zorn going into Trow's boss room. And you have a lot more time to charge because you can fire Loose Atom from really far away, as opposed to Water, which you have to fire really close, and also has some weird rules. The other thing that could be more optimal is that you can actually enter that Seek Day fight with fully charged Grolschwert and hit her from a distance. And what this task does is it actually moves all the way over from the left to the right in order to hit her. And so what going clockwise would do is it would change up the bomb pattern for Schwer a little bit, manipulate it a little bit different, still have an optimal fight, take all of the damage from just that Schwer fight, so 24 damage from that fight, and then also have a fully charged roll short ready, because you don't have to interact with the bombs, you can just start charging the next weapon. And these last two fights, there's not a lot to them because they're very straightforward manipulations, very similar to their original boss fights, I guess. Okay, so here's the big boy. Again, with the second phase of this boss fight, you need to use bombs. And the task currently does is it just fights the first phase using Loose Atom, as you see here. And now it switches the bombs, and now it puts down its bombs. So what could have actually been done is that the bombs could have been placed during phase 1 of the boss fight because of the prime time I talked about earlier, where it takes 145 frames to prime a bomb. So the bomb can be primed in the first phase of the fight for 144 frames and then picked up on the very last frame before it explodes. And you can actually start phase 2 with a bomb already ready to go. And then further from that, you have 5 bombs, so you can actually chain 3 bombs together. So it saves approximately 85 frames. It's not exactly that much, but that's how much it is. And it requires 4 Loose Atom to free the dragon here, but you can actually use 1 Geyser Wand or 2 Geyser Wand and defeat or free the dragon much quicker. So here you're gonna see a weird little blip in the TAS's sliding, and the reason why it does that is so that the last input of the slide really milks the slide for 22 frames, just so it barely hits the door, because that is the last input that the TAS does. And from here, you'll see a really slow Lily fight against the final boss, because Lily does 2 damage. And there's no more TAS input, so the TAS timing has already ended, which is why the TAS is the way it is. It's a total abuse of the system. And you'll see a nice 14-cycle Lily fight for the TAS here. If the TAS really wanted to go in-game time, then it would skip Lily altogether, because Lily is really slow. And it would finish off this boss fight in 5 cycles as opposed to the 14 you see here. Even RTA, optimal RTA fight, is 7 cycles, is already twice as fast as this fight, as you can see. And that pretty much covers the current RKS TAS. A lot of minor changes across the board. Major changes are pretty much Schwer stage is a major change. Trow stage is a major change, given the fact that we're not getting Lily. And then, moving on from there, you have Separun 4, which has a route change. Iris 1, which has an item route change. And then just better optimization and movement all around, up until the point of the final boss, where you 5-cycle the boss as opposed to 14 cycling with Lily. And that's pretty much it. That's the current TAS. It's 27 minutes and 33 seconds for in-game time. Do note that that time is actually in 64 FPS, so the equivalent at 60 FPS is more closer to a little under 28 minutes, if I recall correctly. I don't know if that accounts for TAS timing or for RTA timing, though. Assuming that it's RTA timing, I think it might actually be a little bit more than that. But overall, that's the current TAS in its state, what the problems are overall. And so the new TAS is really close to being finished. It's on the final boss now. So when that's done, I hope to sort of go through the same thing I did here, have a nice TAS viewing of the new TAS, and then commentate over a couple of things that are noteworthy, I guess. But that pretty much covers it. I'm going to end stream here just because this is like really all I wanted to stream for this short stream, at least.